And so what changed? It was the same people, same floor space, same capital equipment. The only thing that changed was all in layer 3. In other words, same people at layer 1, same tools and technology at layer 2. The only thing that changed was the management system at layer 3. And so I think the reason why this resonates so much with us in technology is that we've seen the same thing. The same phenomenon happens in technology as well. But I think that's an incomplete answer because, something also changed in DevOps, which is that, we actually had these radical breakthroughs in layer 2 in tools and technology. And so we know how important leadership is. We know that transformational leadership is such a cool finding. I think it was in organizations that didn't have these transformational leadership qualities, you're only 1/5 as likely to be a high performer. It just shows like, oh man, that's a wild finding that says, leadership does matter. So we know that architecture matters, right? So that's that layer 3. But we also know that technical practices matter. You need automated builds, tests, deployments, telemetry, all these things to make sure that we can do our work safely and quickly with fast feedback and so forth. And certainly I think GenAI is one of those, right? Maybe even bigger. If you can radically improve productivity and group productivity, how does that not change how layer 3 works?
Quick note before we dive into the episode, I'm excited to share the DX Core 4, a new framework for measuring productivity that encapsulates DORA, SPACE, and DevX. We've developed the DX Core 4 through ongoing research as well as practical experience helping companies like Dropbox, Etsy, and Pfizer. To learn more about the DX Core 4 and how to use it, head over to getdx.com/core4. That's getdx.com/core4.
Gene, so great to have you on the show. Also here with Laura today. We're so excited for this conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here. And I'm, Abhi, I mentioned to you, I'm a fan of your work, and it was so great to meet you guys last year. And so delighted to be here. Long time coming. Thank you.
Yeah, we really enjoyed both of our times at ETLS. So thanks for all your efforts there and putting on a great event and great community.
Looking forward to many fun adventures ahead, including this interview.
So, Gene, we want to dive right in. You've had a storied career helping organizations with DevOps and now developer experience and helping organizations really apply these principles to transform how they work. And I want to ask you, I think some organizations view developer experience as sort of a next chapter in their transformation journey. I'm curious, how do you see it? How do you see developer experience sort of fitting into this journey we're all on?
Many organizations see developer experience, developer platforms as their next chapter. I really like that. And I think, and I think there's a reason for that. And, before we started recording, we were talking about, kind of looking back all the way to the Phoenix project, DevOps handbook, the state of DevOps research, the work I got to do with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble, the topics like modularity and architecture and developer platforms. Are they just sort of a random set of practices, that they have nothing in common, or is it actually are they all kind of incomplete expressions of a far greater whole? And there's a reason why these things emerge, and why it should be no surprise, that is the next chapter. And I think it's definitely the second. To me, what is a developer platform? Why is it important? What we know from the Phoenix project is that when to get anything done, you have to open up tickets with 30 different people and pester them for weeks, right? Just to even get the smallest things done. This is terrible, right? And when you spread that across every developer in the organization, across, potentially scores or hundreds of teams, you basically have a system that is locked up where no one can get anything done. And so what I learned from working with Dr. Steven Spear, he wrote the most widely downloaded Harvard Business Review article of all time called Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. And we worked on a book called Wiring the Winning Organization that came out about a year and a half ago. And I cannot tell you how much I learned from that. I mean, it was just the most intellectually challenging thing I ever got to do, but also the most rewarding because, so many things that I kind of viewed as separate before, now are obviously the same thing. And so our quest was, what's in common between Agile, DevOps, the Toyota Production System, Lean, resilience engineering, platform engineering, and so forth. And our conclusion is that they're all incomplete expressions of a far greater whole. And if I can just end with like one other point, is that the other sort of key learning for me over the years, especially working with Dr. Steven Spear, was that the big problem now that we're all trying to solve, regardless of functional specialty domain, is the ever-growing number of functional specialties. And so what I found so amazing is that, what I learned in the book is that, one of the top examples that we use is healthcare systems, which especially emergency departments, which is just notoriously dangerous, right? You risk getting injured at a rate higher than skydiving or even base jumping in an emergency department. The big surprise to me was that it wasn't always that way. In the 1950s, emergency departments were relatively safe. And, the hypothesis is that it was because you had very few functional specialties. You had doctors and nurses, very little technology. You had x-ray machines, and, that's not terribly complex. And so you could get away with what we called a simpler social circuitry at what we call layer 3, technologies layer 2, patients at layer 1. But fast forward 50 years, and now you have scores of clinicians just among doctors. You have nurses, supply chain, pharmacy, transport, right? At layer 2, you have technology. You have not just x-ray machines, but you have imaging, MRI machines, CAT scanners, technology everywhere. And then so you need a very, very sophisticated layer 3 wiring to coordinate all their efforts. And it doesn't do it very well, unfortunately. And so the same thing's happening in our world. We have an ever increasing number of functional specialties. Laura, you had mentioned that you're going to KubeCon, right? It's like, okay, can your average developer rattle off Kubernetes commands to, to restart a cluster of pods? I know I can't, right? You need functional experts. And so how do you sort of avail yourself to all these amazing technologies without having to make everyone a Kubernetes expert, without creating silos that make everyone wait?
I like how the way you just described social circuitry really, we talked before we started recording about solving these organizational problems with math. And one of the math concepts that I often bring into my own conversations with organizations is just simply graph theory. And the more nodes that you have, the more complex everything gets. So, a team of 3, we're having this nice conversation. As soon as we add a 4th person, it doesn't just get 25% more complex. It gets a lot more complex because we have all of these other relationships to manage as well.
I think we were talking beforehand about how much, certain formulas really we love, because it just shows that these are kind of facts of life that, you can't argue away, no matter, how gifted you are in rhetoric. And another one is like, so why are queues so dangerous is that it puts you into an NP hard scheduling problem. And I actually had to prove it to myself that, like, if you have a job shop, as the academic term is, like the job shop, you have work centers, you have routings, and you have to, in order to work to get complete, you have to pass through certain work centers. That is, you're above polynomial time. And I actually had to, I didn't actually believe it. So I wrote a little simulator of, like, how you have 2 silos of movers and painters. And, is it really that difficult to find the optimal solution for, where n equals 20? And what I learned is, like, oh, yeah, you are in combinatorial space where, you don't have to get very complicated before, you are at hours of scheduling time. For trivial problems. I also learned that logging is really difficult when you are in combinatorial space. So that, if you print out something at every step in combinatorial space, you spend all your time logging and not computing.
Yeah, I think queuing and approaching infinity wait time when you're scheduling at near capacity is something I think we feel that every day, right? And I think that's, when I think about the slowification, simplification, amplification themes that you brought up in Wiring the Winning Organization, a lot of it is just like cut down on the number of nodes, don't schedule at 100% capacity, make things flow with less friction through the system, kind of, optimize the system for performance. And that just means cutting down on a lot of the moving parts.
Yeah, so I'll give you a concrete example. This is another one of those kind of aha moments for me. So I think, the great technology leaders that I admire, one of them, her name is Amy Willard. She's director of technology at John Deere. And so she's part of the program committee for Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit. She's shared her experience reports over the years. She and so many others, evoked this, what I learned from Dr. Ron Westrom. He introduced me to the term the socio-technical maestro. High energy, high standards, great in the large, great in the small, and they love walking the floor. And, she talked about, like, how, right, she loves shared services. She loves centralizing the best people, right, so they can, make sure that, that their expertise can be availed to the people who need it most, regardless of where they are in the organization. And but there are certain places where shared services can be very dangerous, where if it's work that every organization has to do and they all have to get in queue and wait, that doesn't lead to great outcomes. And so there are places where she had a specific situation where groups needed the specific expertise, and they were spending a lot of time waiting, like a lot of time waiting. And she said, "I love shared services, I love expertise, but not there." And so she put that, she basically broke up that group, put them in the business units, and suddenly all the problems disappeared, right? Because the scheduling, there was no shared resource. Each business unit got one, right, and it could just be naturally used however they saw fit, within those groups. And for me, the big aha moment was, it takes that kind of leader who kind of understands, oh, right, maybe we've wired our organization wrong, right? That could be software architecture, it could be just how teams communicate and coordinate or schedule. And just by making this small change, right, that entire category of problems disappeared.
Sticking on this math theme, you were also telling us about option value theory,
Oh,
something you've been getting into and studying. So tell us and listeners more about that. What is option value theory? How is it relevant to developer experience, platform engineering, DevOps? How can listeners sort of understand and apply that?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. In fact, this is the first time I've meant to write a blog post on it this week. So I'll do my best. And so I've been working with the amazing Steve Yegi, and we've been exploring how does GenAI help developers, and kind of the conclusion was it's really five things. It helps us do work faster. I think so many of us has experienced that. We can be more ambitious about the things we can build. This incredible one is that we can do things alone that otherwise would have required a team of people. We can have more fun doing it, and we can have more swings at bat. And as we were talking about it, this familiar term, from the past started appearing. Right, it seemed like this concept around option value, and so I learned. Dr. Carlos Baldwin was a student of Dr. Robert Merton, who won the Nobel Prize for economics for the work that he did around option theory. And so he won that with Black and Scholes, which basically created a way to price options. And so an option is the right, but not the obligation to take an action. And I learned about this formula that I guess was in Carlos's book that, despite reading it 5 times, I never picked up on. And the formula is NK divided by T, and then there's ambient value of sigma. So N is a number of modules. So obviously, probably higher is better. K is a number of parallel experiments you can run at any time. So again, higher is better. T is the duration it takes to actually perform an experiment. So you want T to be smaller, right? To make the value go up. And then sigma is something that captures kind of the shape of the risk reward space. And so like when sigma is 1, basically it says that you have perfect knowledge. And there, right, you don't need option value. So what Dr. Bob Merton said was, as risk increases, the value of having options increases. In other words, you want the ability to defer your decision to when you have more information, right? So A/B testing is great. The right to test your A and B options, but you're not obligated to take either one of them, right? You can take A, B, or none. And so when sigma is very high, right, that means you don't know where the treasure is buried, right? The higher the sigma is, like the more valuable that treasure is, right? And so you want to explore. Become more valuable to explore the space of options.
I think we have both equal amount of enthusiasm, or maybe you definitely have more enthusiasm and more knowledge about this. But when we can solve organizational problems with math, it's just very fascinating, because like the physics of these things, of how organizations just fundamentally work in the market, it doesn't vary so much. There's just some laws that we always have to respect that just show their faces in different ways. And I think it's very fascinating. And just reflecting back what you've shared so far with us, in order to be able to run those experiments at such a high throughput of experimentation, we do need the independence of action. We can't have people submitting 30 tickets and waiting in a queue. And there's something you said earlier, all of these things to support that independence of action, like architecture, DevOps, DevX, platform engineering, these are all just like incomplete expressions of a far greater whole. And I wonder how would you describe that whole? What is it that we're actually trying to get to with all of these formulas that we can apply to organizations and different ways of working that are enabling us to do, to unleash the greatness of our organization. Like, what's the whole that we're aiming for?
What we were trying to express in the book was that there's really two concepts that leaders at all levels, need to understand that they are sort of, in my mind, kind of make up what is it that these socio-technical maestros are intuiting and use to lead so well, and just to be concrete, right, that lead to the incredible performance multiples that you see in the state of DevOps research, right? That 2 orders of magnitude, difference in performance across, the 5 tuple of deployment frequency, lead time, change success rate, and mean time to repair. I'm using the kind of the older language, but and in the case of mean time to repair, right, that's 3 orders of magnitude, better performance, right? Which shows how much better you can be when you create the right sort of wiring at layer 3. So, like, what intuitions are they using? And so I think the first one is understanding the notion fully of coupling. And we use the metaphor in the Wiring the Winning Organization book of 2 people moving a couch. And I love this because I have tried for 20 years to understand, like, great software architectures. I mean, I've interviewed, in fact, the whole Ideal Cast I used to run. I mean, that was 20 plus interviews just to kind of try to concretize this elusive property of, like, great architecture. And so here's what our treatment of it is: that imagine 2 people moving a couch, Steve and Gene. You might think that this is all brawn work, no brain work needed. But it turns out, like, there's all this non-obvious problems they need to solve, like where exactly is the center of gravity? To get through a narrow doorway, around which axis do you rotate? To get through a narrow winding set of stairs, right? Who should go first? Should they face forwards or backwards? And what's amazing is that you don't need focus groups, you don't need consultants. Steve and Gene, just by picking up the couch, trial and error, fast feedback, experimentation, right? We have some confidence that they will achieve the mission. But there's all these things that leaders can do to make it more difficult or even impossible for them to achieve their goal. Like, we can turn off all the lights. And, suddenly the nature of the work hasn't changed, but, boy, the work will take longer. It will be more dangerous. They might damage themselves or the environment around them. But what's interesting is that there's another dimension of difficulty that leaders can introduce, which is you can introduce a lot of background noise or, like a loud siren, loud music. And again, we're not changing the problem, but suddenly Steve and Gene can't communicate and coordinate as well. And so as leaders, we can even put in an intermediary that prevents Steve and Gene from talking directly with each other. And so suddenly, right, like, you can put in a product owner or a lawyer or a account manager, or you can put in a Jira ticketing system, right? So that, everything has to be put into well-ordered forms. And what's astonishing is that we have now set up a scenario where Steve and Gene might not achieve their goal. And I think this is what happened with DevOps, 15 years ago, where suddenly the deployments became so complicated. Because Dev and Ops weren't allowed to speak directly with each other, no matter how many fields you put into that Jira ticket, all right, you could not achieve the mission. The information flow so far exceeded the bandwidth given to them. And so essentially they could not work as a team. And so, the couch is really a metaphor for joint cognition, joint co-creation. And so there you want things to be coupled in order to create a single coherent system. So there are some things like, you want developers directly interacting with customers. You want customer observation. You want, certain functional specialties embedded with the developer groups, right? Because you don't want those to go through tickets, right? Because we want that coupling to be there. But for the vast majority of things, we want decoupling, right? We want independence of action, right? Because the interfaces are known, right? And you don't want anything between them actually degrades independence of action. I love this because it's understandable. I wish I had known this like 10 years ago. And then, Laurie, to your other point, like, what's the other missing piece is that you had mentioned the 3 mechanisms of performance: slowification. There are some problems, the most consequential problems, you don't want to solve in production. You want to solve them in planning and practice. And then the second one is about simplification. You divide up and partition problems so they're smaller, so they can be simpler, easier, and faster to solve, and safer, right? Modularization is a great example of that. And then you want amplification. You want to create a system where weak signal of failures are not suppressed or extinguished. You want them to be amplified, so that the problems can be better detected and corrected, or better yet, even prevented. And I think, those three mechanisms really are a pretty complete description of what all the things that we talk about in DevOps, lean, production system, so it's just I find it very parsimonious and very satisfying.
I want to ask you, in regards to these coordination problems that we're discussing here, earlier you talked about how platform engineering, developer experience, these concepts are partly aimed at this idea of self-service and faster feedback loops. One thing we see a lot of leaders grappling with is how many of these problems are truly solvable through tooling as opposed to changing culture, changing organizational behavior. How do you think about that bifurcation and best ways of tackling these problems in organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I have kind of two primary responses. So what I gained a lot of confidence in working with Dr. Stephen Spear was the notion is that layer 3 is the difference maker. And so kind of in our community, right, we know about the joint venture with between Toyota and General Motors. The famous NUMMI plant was this previously the site of the worst performing auto plant, not just in North America, but probably around the globe in Fremont, California. And, the remarkable story is that same plant when it was a GM plant, when in this joint venture, within a year became one of the best performing plants, on par with the best plants in Japan. And so what changed? It was the same people, same floor space, same capital equipment, right? I mean, it's just the only thing that changed was all in layer 3. In other words, same people at layer 1, same tools and technology at layer 2. The only thing that changed was the management system at layer 3. I think the reason why this resonates so much with us in technology is that we've seen the same thing where, the same phenomenon happens in technology as well. But I think that's an incomplete answer because, something also changed in DevOps, which is that, we actually had these radical breakthroughs in layer 2 in tools and technologies. We had CI/CD systems, we had cloud, right? We had, that enabled self-service, which actually, the reason why we call it DevOps is that it actually changed, it sort of blew up layer 3. In what ways has, how dev and QA and operations and InfoSec, what hasn't changed, once you kind of go from, before and after. So I think it's really, we know how important leadership is. We know that, and transformational leadership was it's such a cool finding. I think it was like in organizations that didn't have these transformational leadership qualities, you're only 1/5 as likely to be a high performer, which just shows like, oh man, that's a wild finding that says, leadership does matter. So we know that architecture matters, right? So that's that layer 3. But we also know that technical practices matter, right? Is that you need automated builds, tests, deployments, telemetry, all these things to make sure that we can do our work safely and quickly with fast feedback and so forth. I think leadership absolutely matters. But sometimes there's these amazing inventions like CI/CD, cloud, that so radically change the work structures that it will actually, it should blow up layer 3, right, and create these different ways of working. And certainly, I think GenAI is one of those, right? It's like, maybe even bigger, right? It's like, if you can radically improve productivity and group productivity, how does that not change how a layer 3 works?
Gene, you brought up fast feedback loops and being able to work frictionlessly. And these are concepts, of course, that are part of DevOps and also developer experience. I want to ask you your take on even the name developer experience, right? That folks are talking about, because one thing I've seen, Gene, is that it's not uncommon for especially business leaders to react negatively when they hear the phrase developer experience. One leader I spoke to recently said, developer experience sounds like, please coddle me, like please coddle the developers. So I want to get your take on this. First of all, how would you frame developer experience to a leader and the importance of it? And also, is developer experience just a poor name for these concepts?
To this mythical person, I would say, let's explore what not having it looks like. And I think that was really the thought experiment that was the Unicorn Project, is the notion that you can take the best engineer in the organization, Maxine, and strand them in the desolate wasteland of the Phoenix project. It has years of technical debt, and the best engineer can't build, can't test, can't deploy, can't get logs, can't get can't get license keys, can't do anything, despite the fact that she's like the smartest person in the organization, right? That's doesn't sound very good. Right? It sounds actually terrible. If development is where the value creation happens, you want those people to do their work easily and well. I didn't think that was one of the key takeaways of the Winning Winning Organization book. Leaders enable people in their organization to do their work easily and well. And if developer experience, means helping the hundreds or thousands of people that drive the majority of value creation in the technology value stream. Not that platforms are important, and not that Kubernetes is important, but the value creation is no doubt in ideation, research, design, and development. And a critical prerequisite for that is that they need to be able to get quick feedback on the work, which requires so much of the platform, what platforms need to deliver. And so all those things that we talked about, what naturally belong in platforms, about logging, CI/CD, environment creation, getting a dev environment, right? Those things you don't want developers to have to do by themselves, because they're not going to do it very well, which is why you need world-class experts in these areas. And just to share a story, I mean, oh my gosh, if my most frustrated times is like grappling with configuring CI/CD pipelines, my build image went out of date, and I was so proud that I actually got to implement this feature. Like, turns out, like, for 10 years, every button that I've done in JavaScript is wrong. The hitbox is the text, not the button. And I finally was like, oh, that's why it's so hard to click. So I fixed that in 7 minutes. And then it took me 4.5 hours to deploy because my Node.js build image was out of date, and I didn't know how to make a new one. I mean, I have so many stories where, like, I just wanted to do one thing, and then got caught in the barbed wire of like the environment. And I'm sure I'm not the only person to have run into that problem. Anyway, so that's why DevX and dev productivity is so important.
Yeah, definitely not the only person to run into that problem. And when you think about those interactions that every developer has, and you multiply it across entire organizations, I mean, I think the positioning of DevX, Abhi has the anecdote of like, please coddle me. And I like your take of like, let's imagine a world without developer experience. I often talk about it as like a ping pong and beer problem. It's seen as like a vitamin, when really what we should be talking about is like, can you believe that one of your most talented developers who has the capability to build theoretically anything is sitting there for 4.5 hours trying to futz with a Docker image to update their version of Node? How much money is that costing? Not just money, but time and innovation. These are real problems. It's a painkiller. It's not a vitamin. And I think that's, as soon as we can start to quantify and build a better business case, educate leaders on how to talk about things like developer experience using language that appeals to the whole business and not just to our section of engineering, I think the better off we all are, because these are so important. These topics are so important.
Yeah. By the way, just to riff with you, I had a friend, he owned that part of the system for a large bank. And he said, we hired we opened up a Silicon Valley branch. We hired the best developers from, the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google's. And, we found that most quit within the first 30 days because they were still waiting on laptops. They were still waiting on environments and taking compliance training. And, that was just this big problem that people were forced to face. Right? It's like, okay, we can't even hang on to the best people we hired because of exactly those reasons.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I want to switch gears a little bit, Gene, and I'm thinking about being in the room at ETLS in Las Vegas this past August. And I think this was your introduction to Steve Yegi's talk about the death of the junior developer. And you're very bullish on AI. And I remember kind of the introduction to that talk of saying like AI is just fundamentally changing the way that software teams are going to be composed, and then getting into this idea of like the death of the junior developer because we have AI tools to kind of augment skills of developers, and the shape of our organizations are going to change fundamentally. And I remember thinking like it felt very bold at the time, and I just want to kind of get your take or ask you to expound on that a little bit, because I know you've written about it on LinkedIn and other places, and had done some webinars. And like Abhi and I mentioned, we've been sort of following your explorations. But if you could just, for our audience and the listeners, sort of share your position on how fundamentally, how you think AI is changing the makeup of software engineering organizations, we'd really love to hear it.
Okay, first off, I'll say I'm having more fun now than I've had in like a long time. Maybe it's like been 12, 13 years, like from the early DevOps days. But I think I'm having much more fun now, and I think it's because um, I'm having more fun coding. And so in 2016, I learned about it was actually Mike Nygaard, the author of Release It. He was then the SVP of platform engineering. Well, isn't that interesting? At Sabre, the famous travel platform company. We had just finished a DevOps handbook, and I was looking for something really hard to do. And I thought now was the time to learn this crazy programming language called Clojure, this functional programming language that runs on a JVM. And oh my gosh, it was like the hardest thing I've ever done. But just because, like, how do you program when you can't change variables, right? This is specifically disallowed, right? And I've never written Java before, so I didn't really understand class paths or JVM. But I have to tell you, it changed my life because it reintroduced the joy of coding back to me. So that's like in 2016 and to 2020. But the whole GenAI thing has sort of like dumped gasoline on the fire, right? On a whim, I haven't done graphics programming or graphics manipulation in probably 20 years. I just said, can you write in Clojure, and how I can give you an image. March up the left-hand side of the screen, find the red pixel, and then march to the right, and complete the percentage complete in the video. And again, this is like one of those life-changing moments where it just did it. And there's just no way I could have done that without a ton of reading. The last time I did anything like that was probably 20 years ago in Microsoft C++ in Visual Studio, right? I mean, and it did it essentially in one shot. I mean, I don't know how you can have an experience like that and not just sort of have it change your life and just have that open up new horizons. So I think I just have moral certainty that these are ways to that these help not just individual but will help teams, and brings up the Dora finding from this last year that had this very weird anomaly in it that said the more AI you use, the worse stability you got and the worse throughput got. It's like, okay, that can't be right. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong. They found what they found, but boy, wouldn't it be great to actually sort of test some theories that says under certain conditions, you will not always reduce throughput and reduce stability. You can actually massively increase throughput and not sacrifice stability and get all these other dimensions of value that we talked about.
So Gene, I kind of want to get really specific about this phrase, the death of the junior developer, because I think it is like, it's kind of sensational, right? But what I'm hearing from you is like AI makes coding fun again, and you can do more experiments. You can be more productive as an individual. You can do a lot of things on your own that you might have relied on kind of like the hive mind of your development community to do before. And so I wonder, when we read death of the junior developer, we think organizations don't have to hire junior developers anymore. I wonder if that's part of it, but also that junior developers aren't going to be junior for as long anymore because their learning is just so accelerated. Can you get a little bit more specific about what you mean really with the death of the junior developer?
Yeah, in fact, Steve came up with a follow-up post that I thought was great. He called it the death of the stubborn developer, right? And maybe it's not the junior part, but I think I think there's three things that you touched on. One is that I do think that, and we're hoping to test that people's hiring habits are changing. People's hiring is changing, and I think a great anecdotal example comes from Steve Yegi. He had a head of data that built a data experimentation platform in an afternoon. But what's remarkable is that in the previous year, this would have been a summer intern project for a college student. So great for the head of data, but bad for that summer intern who could have had this amazing project to work on, right? That could have shaped his or her career, right? The second thing is something that Dr. Matt Bean, he actually, after Steve's post came out, he reached out to me and said, we have got to talk, because it turns out he's been studying what he calls the novice's optional problem. And so for 15 years, he's been studying surgeons. And so for centuries, maybe more, surgery has always required three hands. And so this is a very natural place for a senior surgeon and a junior surgeon to work together, right? Good for the senior, they can get the work done. Great for the junior, right? For all sorts of reasons. But with the advent of surgical robots, right, now the senior surgeon has the third hand. And what's happened, and this happens across so many domains, is that the novices become optional. And because they take 10 times longer, they actually have more accidents. any operational minded person will say, don't let the junior get time on the surgical robot because, time is money and we don't want lawsuits. And so this actually starves the path for juniors to become seniors. And so without kind of someone with a longer term view, right, their route has basically been, has evaporated. And then the third thing is, the notion that, just like DevOps with CI/CD and cloud, forced that layer 2 caused layer 3 to get reconfigured. I think we're going to see similar things. I don't know what it will look like. I think there are so many technology leaders who are actually going back into IC roles. And so, like when I say a whole bunch, I've learned of almost 10 examples where technology leaders say, I want to actually get close to the keyboard, right? Steve Yegi was one of them, right? Where essentially it sounds like my tour of duty is over. I want to get back to the real value creating work. I'm sorry, the fun part of value creating work, as opposed to approving expense reports, performance reviews, and so forth. Not that those aren't important, Abhi. We know those are important, but I think it causes the shape of the role to change. And so we know from history that when the role changes, right, layer 3 will also change. So, that's so excited to sort of explore what that might look like, and super interested in any reactions you have to any or all of those.
Yeah, I think the insight around the path to becoming a senior developer being complicated and potentially more difficult with the advent of AI is a really interesting one. And what are the longer term implications of that in terms of, do you then end up with a workforce that is fundamentally, do you have less surgeons, right? Senior surgeons. I think that's the implications of that are interesting and profound. I can't really fully wrap my mind around it here on the spot, but curious what you think, Gene. What does that mean longer term?
Oh, yeah. And the reason why I brought up the Mike Nygaard thing is that, for the junior, what's the benefit? It's like for people who don't feel like bugging Mike Nygaard, which is like included me, like to have an AI as your infinitely patient teacher and coach who won't get mad, when you say, I don't understand, I still don't understand, right? I mean, how can that not change, dramatically change the life of juniors, right? No doubt. But two is, to your point, I think this is where the socio-technical maestro comes in, is that for the vast majority of vocations, let's take lawyers. Lawyers do not become profitable until they're, in fact, the only people who make partners are the ones who are economically profitable. So you can be technically good at your work, right? But without the ability to sort of earn client trust, build your book of business, right? You're not going to make partner because you're still losing money for the firm. And I think those dynamics are probably there for engineering organizations as well, right? And so, the need, as you said, for a pipeline of great senior technologists. And I think kind of to make it very concrete, right, is that Steve introduced me to the notion of the task tree. For any given thing that you want to do, you kind of create a hierarchical tree of tasks, right? And you give your summer interns in the AI the leaf node tasks, and that's getting higher and higher. But, who actually makes the task tree? Who actually creates the architecture that enables ideally independence of action and, the right decomposition of problems? It's the seniors, right? And so, I think AI can help with both of them.
Gene, where is your exploration around GenAI headed next? You mentioned potentially a new book you're working on. Tell us more. What's coming? Where's your research taking you around this topic?
So for me, I mean, I just have so much enthusiasm about revisiting Dora and seeing if we can actually kind of change the instrument so that we can find the signal that we know has got to be there, right? To help developers, both the individual developer and get some hints on what it does to the layer 3 of everything around developers. So super excited about that. Two is I can't believe I'm working on another book, right? I think I hope that's I think for some of us, after you finish a book, it would take something really interesting to get you to write another book. That actually happened to me talking with Steve Yegi. He said he wanted to write a book on the CHOP handbook, how to use chat-oriented programming to help developers do what they want to do. And when I heard about that, kind of against all my expectations, I said, oh my gosh, can I help? And so that's we're on a crash course to try to get our first draft done in a week. And this was in a couple weeks. And it's just been so fun because here's two guys who love using GenAI for developers, for doing development work, trying to explore how much can you get away with writing, right, in a way that makes you do better work, get it done faster, have more fun doing it, be more ambitious of what can be built, be very proud to put your name on it. And so the parallels between CHOP, chat-oriented programming, and CHOW, chat-oriented writing, and maybe star, chat-oriented star, right, is been super interesting. And like the sort of the meta learnings around like what are the common underlying principles of how you use these LLMs is like really, really fun and wild. It has been, like I said, I'm having more fun now than I've had in maybe in my entire life.
Gene, we've really enjoyed having you on the podcast as a guest. Abby and I are we met you in person at ETLS in Vegas, and we're looking forward to meeting you again in person at ETLS in September. One of the things we both admire a lot about you, not only for your, storied career and pioneering work in DevOps, is you're just a magnet for community and assembling fantastic, wonderful people all in the same room. Can you tell us a little bit about ETLS, formerly known as the DevOps Enterprise Summit, for those of you who have followed along? And, if someone listening to this doesn't have experience with this community, what might they expect to learn from the people and the content that's shared in that forum?
It will be the 11th year of the conference. So we've had 24 conferences, and it is the community of people that I admire most. These are people who are changing ways of working. And, upon some reflection, I mean, it just really occurred to me, and I apologize, I'm so late in understanding this, but in some ways it was like the Dora users group, right? These are the leaders who said, hey, we are all interested in a methodical, scientifically grounded way of increasing our ways of delivering value, right? That involves, measurement. As Amy Willard, who I mentioned before, is like, there's no technology leader, there's no senior technologist who's not working with AI. I mean, it's just amazing. It's not just at the strategic levels, but we're all thinking about like, how do we use this amazing new technology to win? And it's not. And so we have last year we had this day 2 was the ultimate GenAI learning day for leaders. It was so much fun. I just met so many interesting people doing amazing things. And so we're going to expand that program by 50%. And we actually changed the logo. So it's like the tech plus AI leaders. And it's the plus AI is sort of in pencil. And it's sort of like a joke, but it's not a joke, right? Sometimes I get a little bit sensitive. Like, is this a fad? It's like, if you think this is a fad, right? You might be making it like a big mistake. And I just love this further validation that says, across every organization, and it's not concentrated in the startups, right? It's everywhere. It's experimenting with like, how do we use this technology to help developers, help our, specific, any project, help these newish initiatives, create incredible value for our organizations. And I think there will be definitely a focus on dev productivity, specifically around GenAI. And we're looking for as many experience reports about, what's working, what's not working, which, was a pattern that we very much are following from the DevOps Enterprise Summit days. And and I just would say, I think the reason why it's fun is, for me, fun is like, kind of collapses at least 3 dimensions. For me, it's like high learning. It's kind of high networking, meaning you're hanging out with the best in the game. And it feels like something really impactful. If something is missing one of those dimensions, or maybe all of those dimensions, I can promise you it's not fun. It's boring. It's a waste of time. And so I just, the goal is really to sort of create that magic where, everyone is learning something super, super important, impactful, right? You're hanging out with the best in the game, and everyone knows that it's good for them as a person, as leaders, for the teams, for their careers, and also great for their organizations as well.
Well, Gene, echoing what Laura said, thank you so much for all that you've done for the community and the industry. And thank you so much for your generosity and spending time on our show today and sharing your perspectives and insights. This is really valuable conversation. And again, really appreciated your time.
Oh my gosh, it's so great to do this with you finally. And I really want to thank both of you. It was great meeting you. It was amazing. And Laura, thank you for getting your amazing clients, to DevOps Learners. The 2 talks from Pfizer were absolutely fantastic and testament not just to them, but also your amazing work. So again, thank you.